4x4, and then in some situations on a 4x2. So I always like to start by, in my mind, thinking about relay times, and a lot of times our kids will look at what time a relay has run and think that is way, that's beyond what we can do, or, beyond, what they think they can do, or just something that, seems way too impressive for them. So I try and break it down, sort of that perception versus reality, right? So I always look at, well, what is the overall, what's the average of a specific relay? And we know, especially at the high school level, like you can run a really fast relay time because you got one stud on there, right? Because there's one boy who can split 48. That 4x4 is going to look really good, And so I try to kind of get our kids to understand, hey, if we want to run certain times, let's talk about what that really means, right? And then kind of the other piece to that is, aside from your first leg, everybody else is getting a running start, right? So when we consider that flying start, so if we talk about like a 128 4x2, that averages 22 per leg. Well, guess what? That means I really only need one guy who can run 22, and then my other guys are 23s. And we nail some exchanges, and we get them as 22 flying splits. Well, now that 128 doesn't seem as as far out there or as far fetched. We need to establish incoming and outgoing responsibilities, right? So the incoming runner, the outgoing person. Preparing everyone. So I can't recall a season where, the 4 people I thought might have been on this relay were the 4 people that ended on it, ran on it the entire season, ran on it even, in a state prelim. Last year on our 4x2, we had an alternate in our 3 rounds of state. We had an alternate in she had to run in every round. She's a 400, 800 girl. But she was prepared enough and did enough exchanges that she could get us through. Being thoughtful with the order, putting kids in position for success, but also challenging them. And to me, that's more so the challenging piece kind of comes really into play when you're talking about like a 4x4. And putting in a kid in a position where if a kid doesn't necessarily want to get out, or doesn't like running the 400 or the 4x4, like let's put them in a position where they have to do something. A lot of times I'll put a kid on the anchor leg of a 4x4 or even a 4x2 even, to put them in a situation where they gotta challenge themselves and they have to learn from something. Your marks, whatever those marks are going to be, they're going to change throughout the season. And so kind of just understanding that as kids get faster throughout the season, those marks are going to change, and that's okay. 4x1s, we'll talk about it, but I try not to let kids get too caught up or too freaked out by how many steps they're giving someone else, right? And does that mean they're slow? Does that mean they're fast because they have to give more or less steps? And then my ultimate saying is keep the stick moving. So regardless of what exchange we're setting up, is the baton moving through the zone, right? I tell kids all the time, I'm like, hey, we could have the 4 fastest people. You look at world-class, collegiate, whatever. But ultimately, if the baton isn't getting around the track, it doesn't matter. There's no such thing as high fives, right, on relays. So the baton has to keep moving. So let's make adjustments. Let's make accommodations to make sure that we do that. When it comes to actually working exchanges, I don't sacrifice workouts to make it so we can practice a lot of exchanges. So we'll incorporate them into what we already do. Build-ups, if we're doing build-ups, we can do exchanges. On recovery days, we'll do just stationary, standing still exchanges. On speed days and tempo days, that's where we'll build in our 4x1 or 4x2 exchanges. Early in the season, I'm not as concerned. We don't spend a lot of time practicing running through the exchanges. Later in the season, that absolutely changes, and it becomes sort of a very key piece of what the kids are doing that day. Another piece, I limit them to the number of exchanges. So I say, okay, if we're doing 4x1 exchanges, we're going through 3 times. Or 4 times, usually no more than 4, but like you get 3 shots at this. Because to me, that number one, again, we're not going to waste a lot of time doing it, but it puts them in a focus mode. And especially early in the season, I'm very big on no meat counts until the end of the season, right? And by that I mean I'd rather make a mistake early and get DQ'd, whatever it is, it's going to be, and we'll learn from it, and we'll be better for it later. So sometimes we've ended practice on a bad exchange, and and to me it's like, let's see how it goes this weekend, and we'll figure it out from there. But especially when you think about your second and your third leg, because they're going to be an incoming runner and an outgoing runner. And so if you're saying, hey, we're doing four reps per exchange, right? Well, that second and that third leg, they got to do 4 as an incoming, 4 as an outgoing, right? So kind of back to the idea of like being thoughtful with where you put kids. If you have your best, 100-meter kid on your relay, a lot of times we want to put that kid second. Well, let's be thoughtful of where we put the other kids. If I have a kid who just is always, not focused, always messing around, like, I don't know if I want that kid, giving the baton to, my 100-meter second leg who, is going to have to do a whole bunch of reps because the other person is unfocused. We never do 4x1, 4x2s on recovery days. Right? So recovery day is a day to recover, right? And to me, there's no such thing as hey, we're going to go 4x1s, we're just going to do them at 70%, right? Or we're just going to do them at 80%. No, we have to do them, and we got to do flying for them. And then we always, and I shouldn't say we always do, but I'm always stressing, make the exchange in practice, right? It's kind of like, in your other sports, in football, ball gets fumbled, somebody's got to always fall on the ball, so always get the ball. Basketball, you're always talking about with loose balls, getting the ball. So with us, like, let's always make sure we make the exchange, right? And I have a few examples here, but it should be a habit so that when we get in a race, it doesn't matter. And I always tell the kids, like, you never know what's going to happen with other teams. There's 7 other teams in our race, maybe another heat. You don't know who's getting DQ'd. You don't know if somebody in another heat's going to fall start. You don't know if somebody else is going to, drop a baton. Somebody might pull a hamstring. Like, you never know. But if we don't finish the race, we have no shot, right? So let's always make the exchange. So kind of just sequel, like, when do we work exchanges? So here's just sort of a sample of a week for us. So highlighted are the days of exchanges. So on a Monday, we'll do 4x4 exchanges as part of our build-ups, right? So before a workout, you probably have your kids, okay, let's go do, get some 50-meter build-ups or whatever it is. We're going to add, and we're going to make 4x4s part of our build-ups. On Tuesdays, that's our tempo day. So that's the day we're going to do 4x2 exchanges, because to me, the speed of a 4x2 exchange sort of matches the speed of a tempo kind of workout day. Wednesdays, I said we don't do 4x1s, 4x2s on recovery days. We don't run through the zones, but we'll do stationary drills. And I have some videos of stationary drills. Maybe we run through 4x4 exchanges as, kind of a loosening up type of thing. Thursdays, that's our high intensity speed day, so we're going to run 4x1 exchanges on Thursday. And then Friday, we'll do stationaries with the other ones, and then if we need to run through 4x4 exchanges, we might do them on that day.
Yeah, can you kind of just explain a little bit with Tuesday in particular, where you have your 4x2 exchanges and then going into 6x200 with your tempo effort, like, as far as the length of the reps you are doing with those 4x2s, what are you doing to mimic that?
Like how far are the kids running up?
Yeah.
Yeah. So usually the incoming runner is about 30 to 40 meters away from the start of the exchange zone. And then the outgoing runner, I usually just let the outgoing runner, once they get the stick and they go through the zone, they can shut it down.
Okay.
And again, I'm telling them, hey, we're doing 3 reps, right? So, and if for like a second or a third leg, if it does take them, and okay, maybe we did 4, I'll take off 1 or 2 200s for them, but, especially at this point in the year, if we need to.
So then, just to kind of piggyback off what you're saying a little bit, how then, knowing that you're seeking for that day to be more specifically at tempo effort, if you're having the kids essentially do 30 to 40 meters going in, how are you then articulating to your kids that for 30 to 40 meters, that's the effort that you're looking for them to mimic?
So, ideally, I kind of, once they've at this point of the season, they've run some 4x2, so they kind of understand a little bit of what it feels like to finish a 4x2 leg as opposed to maybe finishing a 4x1 leg. So kind of getting them to understand that a little bit, but also, sometimes different kids need different cues. Some kids will just kind of understand that idea. Some kids you might need to say, hey, you need to run at, whatever you're doing in a 4x1, if that's like a 10 for you, let's do these exchanges at like an 8. An 8 out of 10 in terms of the intensity of it. And you can tell like when a kid is flying in there, and I've had kids do that, it's like, this is 4x2, we don't need to be doing it quite that intense. So, blind exchanges. Rule number 1, it is the incoming runner's responsibility to make the exchange. Because they can see it, right? They can see it. The outgoing runner does not, so it's first and foremost, it's your responsibility. Now, if the exchange doesn't go well, I'm not saying it's their fault, but it is their responsibility to make the exchange, right? Meaning, they're the one that says stick. They're the one, that sort of, if there has to be an adjustment, it's their job. They can see if the person is too far away. All those things, it's their job. Rule number 2, it's predicated on consistency, and we have skills that need to be taught for the incoming and the outgoing runner. So we'll talk about speed, we'll talk about their eye discipline and their hand placement. And then trust the mark, right? Trust the mark, trust your teammate. When it comes to this, I've seen some teams that do a silent exchange. We always do a verbal exchange, and we always say stick. It's, we don't say Rams or Ladue or anything like that. I feel like when you do these enough and when you do the stationary ones enough, they know the sound of each other's voice and they can recognize that. But they need to trust in the mark and not go early, not go late, and they need to trust in their teammate that their teammate is going to do their job. And then never leave the zone without stick, right? We've had times where incoming runner has literally stopped at the end of the exchange zone, taken a step back, and told the person, get back here, and handed them the baton. Right? So, never leaving the zone without the stick. So, let's talk about the incoming runner. Okay? So, their responsibility, when we talk about speed, they have to finish consistently. Okay? And so, the cues I use is run through the zone, like running all the way through the zone. Your leg is not done when you get to the exchange zone, when your outgoing person takes off. And I have some videos that I'll show where you can kind of see where that happens. We talk about racing through the zone, right? So that mentality of, if I'm the incoming runner, my job is to beat my outgoing runner to the end of the exchange zone, right? When we set up the steps and stuff, we'll see that, we'll make adjustments there. But the mentality of, how do I finish consistently all the time? I'm constantly telling myself, run through the zones. And before a race, when I don't do a lot of rah-rah kind of stuff with the kids, but I will remind the relays, high flat hands, run the zones. Whether it's the first meet of the year, the state finals, whatever, high flat hands, which is be for the outgoing, and then run the zones. And those are the keys, those are the things that they should do all the time. Talk about holding your side of the lane. So we need to share the lane. So if this is our lane right here, if I'm getting it in my left hand, or if I have it in my left hand, I'm on the outside of the lane. If I'm either giving it in my right or receiving it in my right, then I'm on the inside of the lane. All right, so we talk about sharing the lane, and that's part of that consistency. Eye discipline. Their target, I tell them, you have to have a target. Before you shoot, before you punch the baton, you have to have a target. Right? You need to know where you are going, where you are aiming with the baton. And so we talk about the elbow replacing, or the hand replacing the elbow. So if I'm the incoming runner, as I'm coming in, I'm staring at, if it's going to be the left arm, the left elbow of my outgoing runner. And when they start moving, I'm keying right here because when I say stick, that hand is going to replace where the elbow was, right? And that keeps them, again, disciplined, keeps them focused, and not worried about other things that are going on. And then hand placement, we talk about punching. So punching the stick straight forward and waiting for the target. So we punch, right? Because a punch has to be fast, a punch has to be hard, right? And that's how we want the exchange. So they have to be patient, they have to wait for a target, but that follow through, they should be punching and thinking about like pushing that outgoing runner down the track, right? Sometimes you see kids, baton gets dropped because there's probably like that moment where the incoming runner thinks the outgoing runner has it, but the outgoing runner doesn't really know if they're taking it or not, and so it just sort of like lands and kind of goes in no man's land and gets dropped. But if I'm the outgoing runner, my incoming runner is punching and pushing me down the track, then I know, all right, I'm wrapping this thing and I'm going. So we talk about pushing the outgoing runner down the track. So kind of what it would look like here. Okay, so the baton is moving forward, not down. Okay, the baton is upright, not pointed down. Okay, and we are punching straight ahead. Okay? Now, Delaney's 5'11" and Kayla's 5'6", 5'7", so it looks slightly different. And we'll talk about, when we go through some of the drills, we'll talk about the spacing here. But I tell the kids all the time, I'm like, when we do our stationary drills, and we do them with this kind of spacing, like that's for a reason, right? Because here's probably a meter, and if we do that for 3 exchanges, that's 3 meters in the race. Well, nobody's running that 3 meters, right? So nobody's running, really running this distance. So getting them to understand that spacing that is important. But can't really see it from this angle, but Delaney would be offset on the left here, or in her left hand is offset on the right, and then Kayla would be over here. So the exchange is happening straight ahead, not crossing their bodies or anything. And we talk about sharing the lane all the time because if that incoming runner and outgoing runner are stacked on top of each other, not only are they slowing down, right? The speed is gonna be affected, but then we set ourselves up for tripping over one another, spiking one another. Crazy stories I've heard where, because they're not sharing the lane, that outgoing runner, their foot kicks the baton, whatever can happen, right? So those are the responsibilities for the incoming runner. Outgoing runner, same things. Speed, they have to be consistent in their acceleration, in the way they get out, right? They have to trust the mark. And however we end up setting that up. They have to be consistent in the way they start. I prefer a 3-point stance, especially on a 4x1. Right? A 4x1, we want to try and mimic as best we can, accelerating out of the box. Right? I am okay, and a lot of times our girls prefer a 2-point stance, and I'm okay with that as long as they're in a good position. So if they're doing a 2-point stance because that's what they are more comfortable with, then as long as they are low, their feet are facing forward, their arms are separated already, we can live with that. So I tell them, if you were going to get in a 3-point stance, just get yourself to where you're not falling, right? To where you're comfortable, but my feet are forward, I'm in a good position to accelerate, and then I tell them separate the hands, which is a cue I give for block starts anyways. Separating the hands so that we get that initial explosion out of the blocks. So as they're starting, they should already be in this position, right? So that then when the person gets to the mark, separate the hands, we've already, we're in good acceleration mechanics. And it's a little bit harder for them, especially if, they're on the outside of the lane, to have to share the inside of the lane and to not drift, especially on like a 4x1 where maybe their zone is kind of starting on a turn and then going into the straightaway. Eye discipline, so they got to be patient, stare down the mark, Don't get distracted by what place they're in. What, you know, somebody on the inside of them is leaving, somebody on the outside's already taking off, right? Be patient, trust the mark. Keep your eyes locked on that mark. I say go, then turn. And so what I mean by that is, again, we need as much efficiency and little wasted time. So I tell them this, person hits the mark, turn my hand, now I go, takes us too much time. So I tell them they should be going and then turn. So if I'm here, person gets to the mark, I'm starting to move, and then my head is turning after I've already started going, right? So getting them to understand, again, you're starting out, start here, but you still gotta go, right? You still have to accelerate. And then hand placement, high, flat hand. So it should be high, sort of at the incoming runner's chest, flat, so that palm is facing the incoming runner, thumb is pointed down, because now we can easily wrap the baton, right? We don't have any of this, because then if my hand is like this, my incoming runner is going to want to do this, right? So now we've kind of changed that stuff. Makes for an easy wrap of the baton. So for our outgoing runner here, hand is flat, hand is high, chest level. The arm is back, not out, right? Because if it's out, it's high and flat, right? But it's out here. So if we talk about spacing, now my incoming runner is going to be like right next to me, right? So we haven't really maximized the spacing. It's also going to be probably harder when we talk about, sharing the lane. If my hand is all the way out here, and my incoming runner has to be on the inside of the lane. High, flat hand, thumb is pointed down. Okay? So we do this real simple drill, wall drill. Right? I like doing it in the weight room where they're in front of a mirror, so that they can kind of sort of look at themselves in the mirror and see what that hand looks like. But really simple, and if their hand is not flat, fingers are going to hit the wall, right? So it's pretty self-correcting. We do it outside at the field house with the brick wall, which is not as smooth as doing it inside with a concrete wall. Stationary drills. So stationary drills are key for us because it warms up the hands, it warms up the eyes, it gets us focused. We do these in practice before, anytime we're going to do exchanges, blind exchanges, we are always going to do stationary drills. I won't let them do, run. In my mind, if I know they haven't done stationaries and I see them walking over and setting up to do exchanges, I will make them stop and do stationary drills first. We do them on recovery days. So again, days where we're doing 4x1 exchanges, 4x2 exchanges, even though we're not going to run through them. In a meet, after they do their whole warm-up, they spike up. As a relay, as an entire group of 4, unless somebody else is still finishing an event or something, we're doing stationary drills. Okay? So it allows them to sort of dial in, get focused. I'm always preaching to them one event at a time. Well, now we're on the 4x2. Now we're on the 4x1. This is our focus. So we are dialing in. We're mentally getting ourselves ready for that race. Incoming runner, their eyes are on the target, right, on that elbow, because they are going to shoot. They're going to punch straight ahead once they have a target. And that outgoing runner, high, flat hand. And I tell them, be picky about it. This is not the time to be nice to your friend and let them, get away with something that's not great, right? If I'm handing the baton to somebody and we're doing stationary drills, if that hand is constantly low, I tell the kids, I'm like, grab their arm and pick it up and put it where it needs to be. If I'm the outgoing runner and I just keep feeling this, right, this little tap, then I tell them, hey, tell whoever it is, tell Kayla she needs to punch, and they should be able to kind of start to self-correct those things, because I tell them, if you don't want to be picky now, you're not criticizing them, right? But if you're not picky now, guess what's going to happen in the race, right? You're the one that's going to have to hand off to somebody. In that case, like Delaney, you're 5'11", you're going to have to hand off to somebody that's already 5 inches shorter than you, right? And now you're going to have to get down and get a back hand. The other thing is, well, talk about through the video. So when we do stationaries, we line up offset, right? So for us, we're almost 4x1 for sure, and 4x2 we're basically always going. First runner has it in their right hand, okay? Because they 4x1, they're running on the curve. Same thing with our third leg. So they need it in their right hand because they're running. We call the curve. We want to run the shortest distance, so we want to stay on the inside. So they are always having it in their right hand. Second leg, anchor legs are always going to be getting it in their left hand. So they're going to be on the outside of the lanes. So we'll line up like that, and then we go through the series. So it's 2 of each drill or each set before we move on to the next. So we do 3 sticks and a take. And it's just, I don't have volume on here, but it's stick, punch, stick, punch, stick, punch. And then the last one is a take. So we do that 2 times. Stick, 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 take. Do that twice. Then we move on to 2 sticks and a take. Stick, stick, take. And I tell the kids, like, the exchange happens fast, not because you're punching early or because we're trying to move the stick early. The exchange happens fast because once you see the target, you react and you punch, right? And if I'm staring at this elbow, then and that's my focus, and a lot of times I'll ask kids, like, what are you looking at? And I can clearly tell, looking off at who's getting out of the car over there in the parking lot, right? But if you're looking at this elbow, then it should be a real quick reaction of, I'm standing there, stick, elbow, punch, right? And sometimes I'll kind of, the kid's really struggling with it or just new to it or, they just kind of want to do that, or they're punching too early. I might stand next to them and once they say stick and I see and I see the hand back, then I'll tap their arm and that's when they need to shoot. And then stick, take. So we do that one twice. And usually this would be all 4 of them lined up. Alternates are doing this also. Right? So whether it's practice, whether it's just stationary days or we're actually going to run through exchanges, the alternates are going through this also. And then we just do it all take. Now they try and cheat on this one, where first person will say take, and then everybody just wants to put their hand straight back. But I tell them, if we do that, then we're not really working on the reaction piece, right? We're not working on the eye discipline. We're not working on punching once I see the target. One quick note. So if you ever get kids get the baton like this, right? It usually comes down to one of 2 things. Either outgoing runner had poor hand placement, so hand wasn't high and flat, it was somehow down here, low, or it was like this. So it was something wrong with the outgoing runner, or it could have been the incoming runner's fault, because maybe there was a high flat. Well, potentially the hand could have been high and flat, but usually it's either a bad hand from the outgoing, or it's the incoming runner not waiting for a target. Because if they're waiting for a target, then the hand should be able to get there. But if they start moving the baton too soon, and I have an example here that we'll look at, if I start trying to punch too soon before that hand has come all the way up, then we're going to meet down here in the middle, right? And so instead of having a high flat hand, punch, I wrap it. Now I can go and I can hand off, I got all this baton, right, to get to my next runner. Well, if my hand was coming back at the same time this person was trying to punch, then we've got it right here. And now it's like, I guess somewhat the lesser of 2 evils, right? The kid has to adjust the baton. Oh, do one of those, or they give it like this. And I try not to necessarily give advice to them as a whole. I've had some veteran kids that if they get it like this, they're handing off like this, because I know they understand it. They've been through it enough. They understand. That's a pretty small target to get somebody, but they can do it, right? A newer kid, like I'm trying not to talk through it, but if that were to happen, then I would prefer 2 hands, fix the baton. We'll live with it, right? Any questions on those stationary drills? And one thing you didn't see in here, and I have some kids that do it, I have so many other things that I'm picky about with these exchanges that if you want to pump and swing your arms while you're standing there, that's fine. As long as you are getting a high flat handle, right? Because then when you think about it, the goal of the exchanges is to really get us back to sprint mechanics as fast as possible, right? Why do we do a punch exchange? Because to me, this is the quickest way, this is the best way, the fastest way to get us from great sprint mechanics, to my outgoing runner, back to sprint mechanics as fast as possible. So I don't really care if they're pumping their arms or not. So let's talk 4x1 exchanges in particular. I love them because we can rely on a go mark, right? That's going to be our go mark. We are trusting it 100%, right? We can rep through it. We can basically, to an extent, we can replicate a full speed exchange, unlike a 4x2. Right? I've kind of become a fan over the years of a go zone instead of a single tennis ball. And again, to me, this is kind of somewhat athlete dependent. So it's kind of hard to judge a single tennis ball, right? As somebody's coming in full speed, running 10 something, on a split, and I got to pick up when their foot hits this one little tennis ball. So sometimes I use a go zone, which is like 2 to 3 feet for the incoming runner. And generally how I'll figure that out is when we're going through steps, if I feel like, say, our steps might be 17, well, I'll just kind of tell them, all right, put a mark at 16, a mark at 18, right? And we'll kind of, and then if we need to adjust, we kind of adjust the whole zone. So 16, 18 wasn't great, let's go 17, 19 to try and figure it out. Stretching the zone, right? So that spacing is awesome. But when are we going to stretch that? When are we going to worry about that? At free distance. Early in the season, I'm not worried about that. 4x1, 4x2, I'm not really worried about stretching the zones. Like I want reps, I want us getting through, I want to see the legs run, I want to see, see some chemistry, how are we going to compete, those kind of things. So we're not as concerned with that. As we start getting further in the season, we stretch it when we need to. And to me, that's like we got four kids, and it's gonna be tough for us to be top 4, in districts to get out. It's gonna be tough for us to get out of the prelims at state. So we're gonna risk it.